Shalom, everybody, and praise Yah for another blessed day. Hallelujah. We're going to be doing the Torah reading here for this next coming Sabbath, breaking it down chapter by chapter. And we're up to this Torah reading here, which is Genesis 41:1 to 44:17. So we want to do this so we could read it prior to the actual Torah Sabbath reading, so we can have an idea and be prepared of what it's going to say and be about. So please open up your scriptures to Genesis 41 and read along with me as we're here. You can comment in the side chat if you'd like to do so. The last time we were reading here in Genesis chapter 40, we saw Joseph coming out of the dungeon. And while he was actually in the dungeon, and he spoke to the baker, and he spoke to the cupbearer, and he told them their dreams. And then it came through. Within 3 days, Pharaoh did what Joseph said he would in the translation of the dream of the chief baker and the cupbearer, and that was it. And we saw the example of Yeshua as the baker was hung in 3 days, and the 3 days of the wine and the bread, just such a symbolic of Yeshua. Really, really beautiful and amazing as we see this. And now we're in chapter 41, and we're going to start reading that right now. So read along with me. And it happened in the end of 2 years of days, Pharaoh was dreaming, and he was standing by the river. So what I want people to know is, so this was 2 years after. 2 years after the dream had happened, and Joseph translated the dream in a dungeon with the baker and the cupbearer, and it came true. And I'm sure Joseph heard word that it came true, but for 2 years Joseph waited, and he didn't know that the cupbearer forgot or didn't tell the chief baker. He didn't know. Maybe the cupbearer, maybe the cupbearer told Pharaoh, but Pharaoh didn't care. Joseph really didn't know what was happening with that. And it happened at 2 years of days. Pharaoh was dreaming, and lo, he was standing by the river. Now, we got to look at the idea of dreams, because a lot of people say Yahweh, he doesn't speak to me, I never heard from him, and all of this stuff. But Yahweh speaks in many different ways, and dreams are one way he speaks to us. So it doesn't mean everyone that dreams is hearing from Yahweh, but we can't ignore when he is trying to give us a message of what's happening and what's going on. And he often gives us warnings through dreams as well, and predictions and everything else. So, verse 2, and behold, 7 cows. So now Pharaoh was explaining his dream. Behold, 7 cows were going up from the river, beautiful of appearance and fat of flesh. And they were eating in the reeds. And behold, 7 other cows were going up after them from the river, evil of appearance and lean of flesh. And they were standing beside the cows at the lip of the river. And the evil appearing and lean flesh cows were eating the 7 cows of beauty and fat appearance. And Pharaoh awoke. And he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain were coming up on a stalk, fat and good. And behold, 7 ears of grain, being lean and blasted by the east wind, sprouted forth after them. And the 7 lean ears were for the swallowing of the 7 fat and full ears. And Pharaoh awakened, and behold, it was a dream. And it happened in the morning, his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for the magicians of Egypt, and all its wise men, And Pharaoh told them the dream. And there was no interpreter of the dream of them to Pharaoh. So it's very interesting here. We see it happened in the morning. His spirit was troubled. So he had this dream. To him, it was more of a nightmare of what took place. But it really wasn't what took place, as about of he couldn't understand it. So that's what troubled him. So he sent and called for all the people that it's their job, so to say, to translate the dream and to figure this out. And no one could interpret it. So he went everywhere and to everyone, and no one came. And then the chief of the cupbearers spoke with Pharaoh, saying, "May I mention my sin today?" So keep in mind here that this was 2 years after, like we said, and Pharaoh was angry against his servants and gave me into the custody of the house of the chief of the executioners, me and the chief of the bakers. And he dreamed the dream in one night, and we each dreamed according to the interpretation of the dream. And a Hebrew youth was with us, a slave to the chief of executioners. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams to us. He interpreted to each such according to his dream, and it happened. And he had interpreted to us, so it was returned me to my position, and he hanged him. So I don't know how old the age of the baker and the cupbearer were, but it does here talk about the age of Joseph, a Hebrew youth. Well, I don't know what's considered a youth, but he was about 28 at that time when you do the math. And now he's about 30 years old, 2 years later. So, and remember, he was there in the dungeon. He didn't look like a youth. He had a big beard. He didn't look like a youth. So it's interesting that they said a Hebrew youth was with us. And it happened as he had interpreted to us, so it was, and it came true. And Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. So Pharaoh, now all of a sudden, you see, Yahweh had Joseph there for a reason, and this was his day. This was the time. And I want to encourage all of you that have been innocently or have been proving wrongly but you're innocent, to be patient on Yahweh. Yahweh sees all things and knows all things. And here Pharaoh calls him, and they rushed him from the dungeon, and they shaved and changed his clothing and came to Pharaoh. So they shaved everything. They shaved him. They changed his identity. They made him look, and they didn't just shave his beard. They shaved his head. I'm sure he had a nice big head of hair, not just a beard. They clothed him to look like, and they did the same thing to Daniel when he came to Babylon. They changed his name. They take on a whole different appearance. But that's, remember, the outer shell. They didn't change who he was, and nothing changed Joseph. The culture around him didn't change, or the culture around him did change, but he didn't change to go along with it. And that's such an important example of people today, especially at this time as we're coming up on Hanukkah, is to understand what the idea was of the Greeks, to change the culture and to change people within, and through generations change them, to erase the culture of Yahweh from them and their understanding. But even with the pressures around them, Joseph didn't change. He could have. He had every right to. He had every excuse to, but he didn't. He didn't. And Pharaoh sent and called him, and they rushed him in front of the dungeon, and he shaved in one day, in one moment. This is the rags to riches story. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. And I have heard about you, saying you hear a dream to interpret it. Now, 2 years later, he calls on him about this dream. And Joseph replied to Pharaoh. Now, who knows if the cupbearer would have told him 2 years ago when he didn't have that dream, if he would have called Joseph. So that Yahweh's timing is perfect on everything. And Joseph replied, we're up to verse 16, replied to Pharaoh saying, not I. Elohim will answer the peace of Pharaoh. Elohim will answer. So when we're looking at levels of dreams and everything else, and who Joseph was representing here, it was Elohim will answer. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, and now he tells him his dream. In my dream, I'm standing on the lip of the river, and behold, 7 cows were going up from the river, fat of flesh and beautiful of form. And they were feeding the reeds. And behold, 7 other cows were going up after them, poor and very evil of form, and lean of flesh. I have not seen any like them in all the land of Egypt for badness. Now that's added from the first dream. So the first time he said that, we're going to slow down and talk about his dream a little. The first time he said that, when he told his magicians and about the dream, and he told them about the cows, he said the cows were eating the 7 cows and the beauty and the fat appearance, and Pharaoh awoke. It says he awoke, but now he's giving Joseph a little bit more information than he gave his own magicians. It says he awoke and he went back to sleep. That's what he told his magicians. But here, he's giving Joseph a little bit more information. He says, I have not seen any like them in all the land of Egypt for badness. So if I'm one of the magicians or the people of Pharaoh, I'm going to be confused and feel a little cheated now that he's given Joseph more information about the dream than he gave them. But he did. So he said, I have not seen anyone like them in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the cows, the lean and the evil, ate the first 7 cows. And they went into their stomachs, and it could not be seen that they had gone into their stomachs. And their appearance was evil at the beginning, and I awoke them. So now he's talking about going into their stomachs. He didn't mention that the first time either. Well, maybe he thought the magicians were able to figure that out, but he's giving Joseph more detail. He really wants to get down to this and find it about. He said, and then I awakened. And I looked in my dream. This is verse 22. And behold, 7 ears of grain were coming up as one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears, withered and lean, blasted by the east wind, sprouting forth after them. And the lean ears were swallowing up the 7 good ears. And I spoke to the magicians, but not one is making known the meaning to me. And Joseph said to Pharaoh. So right away, Joseph knew the answer as Pharaoh was talking. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. So even though he had 2 awake periods, it was one dream. Elohim has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows, they are 7 years. And the 7 good ears, they are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and evil appearance cows going up after them, they are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears blasted by the east wind, will be 7 years of famine. This is the word that I spoke to Pharaoh. What Elohim is about to do, he has made Pharaoh see. And then verse 29, behold, 7 years of great plenty are coming in all the land of Egypt, and 7 years of famine will arise after them. And all the plenty of the land of Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will be consumed in the land. And the plenty in the land will not be remembered because of the famine afterwards, for it will be very severe. And as to the dream being repeated to Pharaoh twice, the thing is settled, because it is from Yahweh, Elohim, and Elohim is hastening to do it. So now he interprets the dream, but he goes beyond that. And we're going to see here in verse 33. After he interprets the dream, now he's going to tell him what to do about it. He's not going to tell him who should do something about it, but he's going to tell him what to do about it. Verse 33. And now let Pharaoh look for a man who is intelligent and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Now, remember the type of person Joseph is. Remember what he told his brothers to dream. And now the dream's actually in the process of coming through with his brothers bowing down to him. But remember the type of chip on his shoulder that the brothers had towards him because of the way he was. And here he was telling Pharaoh, after he told his father and he told his brothers, one day they're gonna bow down to him. And here he's telling Pharaoh, now let Pharaoh look for a man who is intelligent and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh act, and let him appoint rulers over the land, and take a fifth of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. And let them gather all the fruit of these coming good years, and let them heap up grain under Pharaoh's hand as food in the city, and let them keep it. And let the food be for a store of the land, for 7 years of famine, which will be in the land of Egypt, and let not the land be cut off by famine. Now we're talking about Egypt here, which is the richest country in the world at that time, being told this. And the fact that Pharaoh believed what was being said in the dream was amazing to begin with. But now here Joseph's giving him a plan of how to deal with it. And it says here in verse 37, and the word was good in Pharaoh's eyes, and in all the eyes of his servants. So they all felt that this was a good, wise thing. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find any man like this, in whom the spirit of Elohim is in? And they couldn't even interpret a dream, let alone put this plan into action. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, since Elohim has taught you all this, and let me refresh what we're saying, Elohim and not Yahweh. Elohim is Echad. This is Yahweh the Father and Yahweh the Son here in one, talking or being spoken of here. The unification or the fullness of Yahweh, not Yahweh in a singular form, but Echad, of one, of Yahweh, and all his characteristics here. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, since Elohim has taught you all this, there is no one wise and intelligent like you. You shall be over my house, and at your mouth shall order all my people. Only in respect to the throne I will be greater than you. So here we see Joseph going in one day, in one moment, from being in a dungeon, lost and forgotten about, now to being the leader of the richest country in the world. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, I have set you over the land of Egypt. I have set you over this whole land. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it on the hand of Joseph. And he clothed him with fine linen robes and put a golden chain on his neck. And he caused him to ride a chariot which was the second to him. And they cried before him, bow the knee, and put him over the land of Egypt. And the note here says, this is typifying the relationship with Yahweh and Yeshua, and Yeshua being the second in command of the universe. And, referencing Philippians 2:9 and 11. If we go to Philippians 2:9 and 11, it's not significant. I want to go there because this is showing where Joseph is made ruler of all the land. We're going to go to Philippians here. You want to turn there with me and see this all in your own scriptures. Philippians 2:9 and 11. For this reason, Yahweh highly exalted him and gave him a name above every name. At the name of Yahshua, every knee shall bow, of this in heaven and on the earth and those under the earth, and every tongue shall confess that Yahshua Messiah is Yahweh, the Son, to the glory of his Father. And so we see that there, and this is a typifying the relationship with Yahweh and Yeshua being the second in command of the universe. And we see Joseph being a type of Yeshua. And it's interesting to note that Yeshua's ministry started at what? Age 30. And what age was Joseph here? Age 30. Very interesting. And there's so many correlations between Joseph and Yeshua, and Joseph being a type of Yeshua. And what did Joseph do? He set his people free. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without a word, this is verse 44, without a word from you, not a man shall lift his hand or his foot in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh was confident in this decision and this dream and what's going to take place. And Pharaoh called Joseph by the name of Tizabeth Paneah, and he gave him Asantith, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, for a wife. And Joseph went over the land of Egypt, went all out over the land of Egypt. So not only did he get this position, but he also got a wife. And it says the daughter of Potiphar, or Potipharia, the priest of On. Some would suggest that he was in the house of the executioners, a slave of Potiphar, but this was another Potiphar. This was a different Potiphar, but still in the offices of Pharaoh, the priest of On, for a wife. And Joseph went all over the land. Now, what I find amazing was, it was the common tradition of the offices, the people close to Pharaoh, was that they were made eunuchs, as we saw when Joseph was taken into slavery. I don't hear anyone talking about this, but this is quite amazing. It's the common practice of them to be made eunuchs. And the reason for that being is that none of them could have children that will later overthrow the king. But not only did not happen to Joseph, not only was he not made a eunuch, he was given the daughter of one of the priests to be his wife. So Pharaoh had full trust in Joseph. It says in verse 46, and Joseph was a son of 30 years as he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the face of Pharaoh and passed over all the land of Egypt. So he was 30 years. And the land produced by handfuls of 7 years of plenty. And he gathered all the food of the 7 years which were in the land, of Egypt. And he put food in the cities, the fruit of the field which is around each city. He put it among it. And Joseph heaped up grain like the sand of the sea, exceeding much, until he ceased to count it, because it was without number. So we don't know if Joseph's dream was interpreted in public where everyone heard what was about to be done. This would seem that it wasn't done in public because everyone would have saved food if they would have known this. Or maybe they didn't believe or listen to Joseph, but his plan was being carried out. And then in verse 50, it's quite interesting. As Joseph was storing up all the food and everything, his wife, we don't know the age of his wife, it doesn't say, but it says in verse 50, and 2 sons were born to Joseph before the year of famine came, when Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest over On, bore to him. So up to this point, for the first 6 years of his marriage, he had no children. But then in the 7th year, he had 2 sons being born, and they were not twins. 2 sons being born in the same year who were not twins. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh. For Elohim has made me forget all my toil in the house of my father. Well, it didn't seem he forgot it. It seemed like he always remembered in the back of his mind what happened. So much so that when he had his son, he still remembered what was going on, and he named his son Manasseh. And the name of the second called Ephraim, for Elohim has made me fruitful in the land of my affiliation. And I was listening to J. Vernon McGee, a great Bible translator, and he was saying the names might have been Amnesia and Ambrosia, because that's what these names represented. Manasseh, to forget, and fruitful ambrosia. But Manasseh and Ephraim. So he has these 2 sons born in the same year. And the 7 years of plenty, which were in the land of Egypt, were ended. And the 7 years of famine began to come according to the dream, as Joseph has says. And famine was in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. So even the land of Egypt was touched by this famine that was amongst the land. But they were prepared, unlike anyone else. And all the land of Egypt hungered, and the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. It's interesting that they cried to Pharaoh and they didn't cry to Joseph. Seems the people still had not accepted Joseph and his position. They cried to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said, "Go to Joseph. What he says you do." And Pharaoh, sticking to this, says, "Go to Joseph. Why are you coming to me? He's the one in command." And the famine was on the face of all the land. And Joseph opened all which was in them, and said to the Egyptians, and the famine was strong in the land of Egypt. And all the earth came to Egypt to buy. And Joseph, for the famine was strong in all the earth. Now, let's look at famine for a second. Yahweh puts plagues on situations. And there's 3 identifications of a plague that's from Yahweh. Number 1 is sickness. Number 2 is famine, and number 3 is death. Disease, famine, and death are 3 consequences of being disobedient to Yahweh's Torah. All throughout the scriptures, those are the 3 signs of a plague from Yahweh, and it talks about it. You had famine, you had disease, and you had death. And here we see, and keep it in mind, the people suffering the famine. And we're going to look later, and we're going to see the disease and the death. Yahweh's hand in this situation. So powerful. Keep that in mind as we keep reading. That's the end of chapter 41. Thank you for reading this with me. We want to read the Torah reading previously to this Sabbath next week so we can have a good understanding of this. But just remember that as we keep reading here. Yahweh willing, we'll read tomorrow's Genesis 42. And thank you all for joining me here today for this. Yahweh be with you all this day. May Yahweh be with you, and shalom, shalom.